Hello friends! Today I want to talk a little bit about a book that was without question one of my favorite reads of 2014. I know I'm going way back in time there, and that is Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. This book was published in 1986 and is a juvenile or maybe a young adult fantasy adventure fairy tale that somehow I had never heard of until 2014. I'm not sure why that was the case, unless it's because I was not much of a fantasy reader growing up, and when I went to the library, I spent most of my time scanning the shelves for books that had the little skull stickers for mystery on the spine, and anything that was fantasy I pretty much ignored, with a few exceptions. Anyway, when this book first came up for me a couple years ago, I read the description warily because it said something about a wizard and an evil witch and someone under a spell. Not my kind of thing. But then my friend suggested it, and when I said, oh, it's got magic and fantasy, and I'm picky and choosy about those things, she said, just give it a try. So I did. And my reaction was, why didn't anyone tell me to read this book before? Years have been wasted in which I could have been rereading this book. Yeah, I fell in love with it. The story centers around Sophie, the eldest of three sisters, who makes hats and is destined by the rules of fairy tale tradition, which are very real in this world, to live a quiet, unexciting life. However, when the Witch of the Waste comes into the hat shop one day and takes offense at something Sophie says, she puts a curse on Sophie that turns her into an old woman. The only thing for Sophie to do now is leave home, and searching for a way to get the enchantment lifted, she gets herself a position as housekeeper at the strange moving castle where the wizard Howl resides. This book is full of surprises plot-wise, but more importantly, it's just such a pleasure to read. Diana Wynne Jones wrote with this great, appealing, whimsical style, and the characters are so much fun. I found that I didn't want the book to end because I wanted to keep reading their interactions and their conversations, even when it seemed like they were talking about the most mundane things. Our main character, Sophie, makes a great heroine. She's gutsy, she's sensible, she's humorous, and she's flawed. Calcifer, the fire demon with a bad attitude, has some of the best lines, and the wizard Howl, I don't know what to say about him. He's a character full of imperfections and some really bad qualities that you cannot help being attracted to. Yeah, it just got weird. There are two scenes from the book in particular that are my favorites. One is a scene that made me laugh so hard, and that is Sophie's attempt at a clothing enlargement spell that goes horribly wrong. The whole thing struck me as so funny that weeks later I would be doing something and randomly the thought of it would pop into my head and I would crack up, and that was really hard to explain to people around me. My other favorite part was all of chapter 11, titled In Which Howl Goes to a Strange Country in Search of a Spell. What the strange country is, I will not give away, but it is amazing, and I had the stupidest expression of shock and glee on my face the whole time. I loved it, and I absolutely adore that Diana Wynne Jones did such a thing. The book's only weakness, really, I found, is that its conclusion has a lot going on. There's some chaotic bursts of action and several big reveals, and it's hard to keep these revelations straight. But honestly, at that point, I didn't really mind. I was so happy with the book that I read it again the next year and then read the two sequels. Castle in the Air, which came out in 1990, I was skeptical about, as we're skeptical of all sequels, but it turns out it's an impressive follow-up. It has an Arabian Nights flair to it, complete with magic carpet, which makes it really different from the first book, but just as delightful to read and experience. The new story and new characters are fun and entertaining in their own right, and then the addition of old characters we know and love makes this a sequel worth checking out. The third book, House of Many Ways, came out several years later in 2008. I didn't enjoy it quite as much as the first or the second book. It has a slightly slower pace and a main character who's not always the most likable person, but she's an avid reader, so there are some really good bits about books and reading in there, and while the eventual reappearance of previous characters is a little unusual, it's still fun, and in the end I enjoyed this one too. so the trilogy as a whole scores very well. Lastly, there is a film adaptation of Howl's Moving Castle from 2004, written and directed by Hayao Miyazaki and animated by Studio Ghibli. I have not seen this movie yet, because I am afraid it will alter the way I see the characters and the story in my head, but I know many people love it and say it varies from the book enough to make it a separate entity highly regarded on its own. Someday, I'll get up the nerve to watch it. So if you have never read Howl's Moving Castle, maybe you should check it out. I certainly recommend it, even if you don't like fantasy and magic. I understand exactly what boat you're in, and I think there are still things that you might find to enjoy about this one. And if you have read it, I'd love to know. If you love it, if you've read the sequels, if you love the movie, please go ahead and let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. Bye!